So the lack of DNA among Native Americans, according to the MesoAmerica folks, they say, well, okay, so how can we address this? And so they actually have come up with that. There are several things that need to be addressed. I think
Yeah.
for those of you who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there have been articles and books written involving DNA, and it's kind of become less of a big issue now
Yeah.
for most members of the church. But for a while, it was a really huge issue. So there's a couple of books. One of them was done here by the Maxwell Institute. It's called The Book of Mormon and DNA Research, and you can see how much I've
Yeah.
actually I've gone through this entire book with a fine-tooth comb, and found there are legitimate arguments for some of these things. And when
Yeah.
I say that, basically, so let me just really quickly kind of go through and dive into this, and then explain why I feel like, and based on the Book of Mormon, that some of these arguments don't necessarily hold up. But let's just kind of just briefly go through that. So,
Okay.
primary explanation from LDS scholars of why there's no DNA evidence for the Book of Mormon. So you'll find that kind of it's evolved into,
Yeah.
well, there's no evidence either for or against the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. I hear
Yeah,
I hear this an argument a lot, which this will kind of cover too, it sounds like.
yeah,
An argument I hear a lot is even the church admits the DNA evidence doesn't show anything. Even the church admits that there's no real DNA evidence here. So
yeah,
let's talk about a little bit about what the church has from the LDS scholars, which was kind of looking from a Mesoamerican type setting, and
yeah.
then sort of how do we explain what we see. Yeah.
Exactly. So one of the primary arguments is well, we don't even know what we're looking for.
Hmm.
I address this in my book. By the way, the book is called Rediscovering the Book of Mormon Remnant Through DNA. It was put out in 2009. If you can get copies of it on our bookstore if you want a hard copy. If you want to just download it for free, just go to the downloads page and you can download the whole book for free and you can go over it. But it really goes into all of these details in much more than we can do on a in a 45-minute podcast. But one of them is we don't even know what we're looking for. So they said, so since we don't have a representative sample of Lehi or whatever, we don't even know what we're looking for. So how can we ever possibly find it? And the answer to that, I think, is that we know what we're not looking for. We're not looking for Asian.
Right.
We're not looking for African
You're
DNA.
not completely blind. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we know at least something about these
Mm.
the lineage of Lehi and his family. So do we know exactly what DNA group he is? And we haven't talked about the Y chromosomal DNA yet, which is the other
That's true.
critical part we got to
That's
get
true.
to. Okay, but basically, so what are we looking for? We know that they were Hebrews, and so we're looking essentially for Hebrew or Hebraic DNA, and specifically that kind that was found in Jerusalem at the time of the Book of Mormon. The number two thing is that Lehi's group was just a small, like a genetic drop in the bucket, so to speak. Lehi and his family arrives in a promised land. The Mayan civilization is already well established, as we know from archaeology. Lehi and his family shows up. They assimilate into the Mayan culture. The Mayans have 20,000 people. The Nephites have Nephi and his family have maybe 30 to 60 people, and so they just assimilate. And then within just a few generations, that would be essentially just it would no longer even be able to be found because it would be diluted out of existence essentially. So that's what they're saying. So Lehi's group was just a small population and was diluted out of existence. The problem with that is
Yeah.
that doesn't follow the Book of Mormon at all, because it has Nephi and his family. They show up in the Promised Land. There's no
Yeah.
evidence that they were assimilating into any other culture.
Yeah.
In fact, when Nephi leaves the land of first inheritance and goes and establishes the land of Nephi, they make him the king, and they didn't say, and we fought our way into and took over the lands of these people to establish the land of Nephi. It seemed like it was pretty much just an empty continent. They could just kind of go wherever they wanted to and establish themselves. And then they were there for 600 years, multiplying and replenishing for 600 years with a strict command not even to intermarry with their own brothers, Lemuel and their ancestors or their descendants. So I find it hard to imagine that they would just willy-nilly just decide
Yeah.
to assimilate into another culture. And if they did so, why would they make Nephi the king? And even more so, how would these Hebrews who have kind of odd culture, cultural things that they do, they're observing the law of Moses, they have their a lot of cultural things, like for example circumcision is a big deal among the Hebrews, right? And if they assimilate into another population, what are they going to do? Line up all the men and say, "Okay, boys, time for your circumcisions. Let's do it." I don't think that's going to go over very well in a lot of other cultures. There's no indication that there were other people that were there that were doing it. In fact, there's only really one or two times when they found other people. One of them was when they found the Mulekites, and that they recorded. And the other time was when they have the last Jaredite wanders into their city, and Coriantumr, basically the last Jaredite wanders in. And they go, and he wasn't from us either.
Yeah.
So they actually do make several times when other people did show up, and they're in the record. So why is none of this in the record earlier on?
Yeah. So as you know, so from the I would say from the archaeology and DNA, we do know that there were other people in the Americas in Mesoamerica.
In Mesoamerica, yes.
And so to me, I think that part is clear. For in terms of what the LDS scholars do, if you're taking from that Mesoamerican viewpoint, you can kind of see where they got with this, because
they have to kind of
because and when you do the DNA testing down in Mesoamerica, I would say you do see, and it's not much, but it's more than a drop in the genetic bucket, but you do see a little bit in the autosomal DNA testing that has come
of modern populations.
But my understanding is that was likely mixture that occurred at some point, as opposed to that being where the Book of Mormon occurred. But anyway, I'm sympathetic. I understand how they got to this, because if your viewpoint is that it was in Mesoamerica, this does come out as the most logical explanation, which is that okay, because that's what you see a very small. Right. You see a small bit of you see Hebrew influence in some of the culture, and then you see a small bit of DNA.
Yeah. So I understand that's the case, but you do really have to ignore.
But like you said, that you kind of have to twist the understanding of the Book of Mormon to do that. Yeah.
But it is a thing that now another thing though, and that is that the Book of Mormon population were eliminated through what they call genetic bottlenecks.
Yeah.
So for example. There's an Icelandic study where there were a handful of people who went into this Icelandic population, and within about 6 or 7 generations, their mitochondrial DNA wouldn't show up in a test because it had been so diluted.
Right.
And so that actually can happen, and that's a legitimate thing. And we do know that there were actually genetic bottlenecks that happened. I mean, the Nephites were wiped out.
Yeah.
So that would have been all of the Nephite lineages that had come down over the course of time when they were all exterminated at 400 AD. None of those came through the current populations that we have.
Well, I agree that, and as you know, the Book of Mormon and DNA studies, the Gospel Topics essay goes into that, and it is written from this perspective, and I agree that it's if we were at a point where it was like we don't see DNA evidence for the Book of Mormon, then this is a valid fallback argument, because it's like, yes, you have bottlenecks. You could end up in a situation where you don't see any DNA, and that's kind of what the DNA Gospel Topics essay did. But that's because of not recognizing what we're saying here, which is you don't have to go there because there's so much better evidence.
Yeah, and the other thing is to me, it's really important that also, and that is that it also ignores the prophecies. The prophecies in the Book of Mormon that said that there will be a remnant of our seed that will be and that they will know that they are the remnant, that they're not going to be destroyed. In 2 Nephi chapter 9, it says that he has promised unto us that our seed shall not utterly be destroyed. So if their seed's not going to be utterly destroyed, that means they're still here, right? It says, in future generations they shall become a righteous branch unto the house of Israel. And it also says it's not going to be destroyed according to the flesh. So that's literally talking about their bodies. And then here in 2 Nephi chapter 30, verse 4, it says, and then shall the remnant of our seed know concerning us, how that we came out of Jerusalem and they are the descendants of the Jews. This
I would
neutral
love,
argument
yeah,
does nothing to actually fulfill that promise in the Book of Mormon of the remnant knowing that they came from Jerusalem.
right. I would love for this DNA evidence that you kind of stumbled on. You saw it was big.
Yeah.
I would love for that to help people start to recognize the true ancestry there.
Yeah, especially the Native Americans, because
Yeah.
it's important for them to know that they are the covenant people of God, that they have made, that they come from people who were descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and there were specific promises made to Abraham and his posterity that many religions on the earth really fall back on. But for example, the Dome of the Rock is such a big and important place because that's where Abraham received the covenant, and you have
Right.
three of the biggest, most powerful religions on the planet. The Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians all want to have that spot because they all want to be partakers in that covenant. Well,
Right.
the Native American people who have the haplochromax DNA type are partakers in that covenant, but they don't even know it.
Yeah.
And this is why this is important.
It reminds me of the scripture in Ezekiel, the prophecy, and he talks about the dead bones. And it's like one of the
Yeah.
lines there is that we're cut off from our parts. And when you are disconnected from your history, you don't know your ancestry, you don't know your history. It's like being cut off and
Yeah.
disconnected. And so, like you were talking about in Jerusalem, that connection to that land, those places, those things are important.
Yeah.
We need to get that for the Native Americans to help them, to connect them, to understand their true ancestry and history.
Yeah, there's one last scripture I think that just is so apropos here, and that is 1 Nephi chapter 15, verse 14. It says, "And at that day," meaning our day, "shall the remnant of our seed know that they are of the house of Israel, and that they are the covenant people of the Lord, and then shall they know and come to the knowledge of their forefathers, and also the knowledge of the gospel of their Redeemer, which was ministered unto them ministered unto their fathers by him. Wherefore they shall come to the knowledge of the Redeemer and the very points of his doctrine, that they may know how to come unto him and be saved."
That's right. And that purpose
That's
was
what it's all
restated
about.
right there on the
It's
title page.
saving
That's
the
purpose.
covenant people of
Yeah.
God. And the DNA research that we're involved with actually verifies that. The neutral hypothesis idea, basically that there's no DNA evidence, does nothing to fulfill the prophecies.
Right.
So that's another reason why I think it's important. Should we talk about the Book of Mormon and DNA studies essay?
Well, I think that I kind of raised that already.
Yeah, you did.
Because I do hear that a lot. It's like, well, wait a second. Even the church's Book of Mormon DNA essay, it doesn't say any of this. If this was valid,
Why doesn't it say
why
that
doesn't it
in the
talk
essay?
about? And I would say, well, so if you knew the history of how this was written, I mean, it's written by scholars. It's not like this. It's not claimed to be a prophetic revelation or anything like that. It's written by the LDS scholars at the time. It was written in 2014, or at least published in 2014, and they wrote it from their understanding, which, as you know, at that point, their understanding was that there was no
Mesoamerican.
DNA evidence, right? They're working off a Mesoamerican assumption, and so with that, like I said, it's a reasonable view to say, well, here are all the reasons why you might not see DNA evidence. And that was a reasonable assumption, but it's living way below our means because there actually is DNA evidence. Yeah.
There really is, and I just wanted to point out just a couple of quick things if we have time to do that. And that so one of the assumptions here in the essay. Now this I actually pulled this a few years ago, so the essay may be just
They have done
slightly
some
different
tweaks, so it's possible.
now, and they have been making adjustments, and we want to thank the church and those who are involved with that for making some adjustments and some changes, but it still is basically taking. They're pretty much using one specific geneticist who is a super nice guy.
Yeah.
I've met him a couple different times, and he used to work for Sorensen Molecular Research Foundation.
Yeah. Dr. Ugo Perego, and
Yes.
he provided a lot of the content.
Yeah, I think he was the primary, spokesperson.
That's my understanding. My understanding was that he kind of wrote a first version, and then there were other people that kind of commented, and it resulted in this.
Yeah, but basically, so one of the assumptions here is that the ancestors of the American Indians, He says that the Book of Mormon provides little direct information about cultural contact between the peoples it describes and others who may have lived nearby. So that is actually that's accurate. There's very little direct information, but that doesn't stop them from speculating that this is actually what happened. He says the Book of Mormon itself, however, does not claim that the peoples it describes were either the predominant or the exclusive inhabitants of the lands that they occupied. In fact, cultural and demographic clues to its text hint at the presence of other groups. So it says it hints at that, and then it gives a reference number 6. Okay, we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, and then it says Joseph Smith appears to have been open to the idea of migrations other than those described in the Book of Mormon. That's number 8 reference. And many Latter-day Saint leaders and scholars over the past century have found the Book of Mormon account to be fully consistent with the presence of other established populations, and that's number 9. But if you go and you actually look at where those references are referencing to, it actually is referencing the MesoAmerica promoters.
Right.
So John Sorensen is number 6. When Lehi's party arrived in the Promised Land, did they find people there? And John Sorensen, as a MesoAmerica guy, has to say, yeah, there was other people there. They assimilated and so forth. Even though there's no direct evidence, they even said there's no direct evidence. But this has now become the predominant assumption here. Number 8, facts are stubborn things, the times and seasons. This has been falsely and incorrectly used as evidence that Joseph Smith was changing his mind about his earlier revelations. These were in the Times and Seasons articles that Jonathan and I have discussed in deep detail in our Joseph Smith 2.0.
Your other videos have done a great job with that one.
So we have completely debunked that, and that's not even a valid thing. It wasn't even written by Joseph Smith, and actually was written by people who Joseph Smith disagreed with specifically. So that is actually used as a reference. And then number 9, for a review of the statements on this matter, see Matthew Roper. Matthew Roper is another MesoAmerica promoter, and it's Nephi's neighbors, Book of Mormon, and Book of Mormon people and pre-Columbian population. So again, they're trying to accommodate the Mesoamerican setting and saying that there's no DNA for the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And when they say that, then they also have to say there's not any against the Book of Mormon as well, but there's none for.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this neutral argument. If you look at some of the other references in it, is Hugo Prego, an article that he wrote that actually is in the journal Current Biology, and so he's literally referencing himself as the source of the information, which is okay because he is a geneticist, but it's a little circular to quote yourself as your primary source of why you're right. Okay. And then you have John L. Sorensen again. So you have some issues there. And then last but not least, that says, as the present time scientific consensus holds that the vast majority of Native Americans belong to subbranches of the Y chromosome haplogroups C and Q, and the mitochondrial DNA haplogroups A, B, C, D, and X, all of which are predominantly East Asian.
Okay, so that actually, that's one where they have tweaked since then.
They have changed that now.
Yeah.
Good.
So
do you know what it says?
I can't remember exact wordings, but instead, because I don't know if you had reached out, but I actually reached out to the church and I said, this statement here was incorrect. And at some point it was modified to where it no longer says that X is East Asian, but it still kind of implies that it's understood to have come from Asia or something to that effect.
Oh, good.
So they kind of took it back, but still, what you can see is that when the LDS scholars who wrote this, when they wrote this, their understanding was less than what we actually have now. Their understanding was that X was Asian, and that kind of colored how they did this. And I'd love that at some point we have a more powerful and robust assertive DNA topics essay. But.
Because the East Asian thing is something that has been bantered about. I mean, we already in the previous episode we talked about how they actually had ruled out the Altanes.
Yeah.
And that was not the
That's
source,
right. That's right.
So that's been going on. It says a 2013 study states that as much as 1/3 of Native American DNA originated anciently in Europe or West Asia. That's noting the National Geographic article there. And then it says this study paints a more complex picture than is suggested by the prevailing opinion that all Native American DNA is essentially East origin. So that's actually is correct. The last part of it is that he's talking about the dating here. And it says this is due in part to the fact that the molecular clock used by scientists to date the appearance of genetic markers is not always accurate enough to pinpoint the timing of migrations that occurred as recently as a few hundred, even a few thousand years ago.
Right. So at least there they recognize that the
Yeah, that's a
molecular
good
clock,
thing. Yeah.
it's not clock-like, and especially if you try to apply it to something that's recent, you can't count on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one thing I find is fascinating is that Hugo Prego and those who were working with him in producing the essay, they quote some mainstream scientific journal articles that talk about the dates and being these long dates.
Yeah.
But they deliberately left, I don't know about deliberately, but they left those dates out of the essay. But if you go to the referenced article actually does say the date, and then people go, okay, so this is the church's position, and then they read the article,
Yeah.
and with no explanation of how the dating works, they find out that the dating shows that the haplogroup X showed up here long before Adam and Eve.
Again, relying on
And
that
there's
molecular clock stuff again,
And it just
and so
throws
yeah, it
everything
is a
back
problem.
off again.
It is
Yeah.
a problem because, as you indicated, so people that are hostile to the church, they'll pull this out, and then they just like, oh, but if you look at these writings, well, what this means is that the church is, you know,
Deliberately
no longer believes in
misinforming or whatever.
the creation,
Yeah,
right?
or
So-
that,
or
yeah,
whatever
so-
that they might.
Yeah,
use it
so
for.
there's a lot
Yeah.
to that whole argument, but the bottom line is David. So as from your, let's go now into a secondary witness, because we've been
Okay.
primarily talking about mitochondrial DNA,
Yes.
and this is, I don't know how long this is going to take us to do this.
I don't think it'll
but,
take very long. I
But
think
let's jump
yeah.
into the Y chromosomal DNA, because that's another
Yes.
amazing evidence.
Yeah. It's always nice when there's a second line of witness, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so you had covered well the haplogroup X stuff. That, as you indicated, that was the first line of testing that they did, and that kind of tests the matrilineal line, the mother's line. They have since done the Y chromosome DNA, the patrilineal side, and when they did that, they found some that looked like Asian origin. But they also found, especially in that Northeast North America and that heartland area, particularly among the Algonquin tribes that you were talking about, they found a very high percentage that were a Y DNA haplogroup R. And it turns out actually one of the Asian lines, they call that Y DNA haplogroup Q, but one of the Asian lines actually has, it's split and there's more than one type, and one of those types actually goes with the heartland area too. It's a haplogroup Q Y4276. But anyway, and it fits right where the Y DNA haplogroup R is, and thanks for pulling that up, Brill. But when you look at where this Y chromosome DNA is found, this, which is a non-Asian, as if you look down at the bottom of that, you see the top was the haplogroup X, which Rod had covered before. Clearly non-Asian. Where do you see it in the Old World? You see it in the Middle East. You see it in the Northeast North America, kind of Great Lakes Heartland region. In the Old World, you see it primarily in the Middle East. Well, with this Y DNA side, the haplogroup R, the bottom side here, when you look at, and this is testing the indigenous populations, right? So this isn't just like all of America. This is indigenous populations. They found it in that Northeast North America, which fits the same places where they were seeing this haplogroup X. When they look back in the Old World, as okay, so where does this come from? It's not in the Eastern Asian populations. Where you primarily see it is like Caucasian type European populations. It's spread around some, also South Asia. But if you look in that Middle Eastern area, it's a significant 10 to 30% of the population of that is actually that Y DNA haplogroup R. And so what you have here is this, again, non-Asian type DNA, very significant population groups with like the Ojibwe and some of the tribes up there. They found it at over 50%. Over 50% of the men had it.
Wow.
And they're like, we don't know what to do with this. Actually, I think, Brill, there's a slide that one of them that if you could pull up too. Yeah. I like to provide people with the peer-reviewed sources showing this just so that they know that we're not crazy, right? And
we're not just
just
pulling this stuff out of, this is not pseudoscience.
Right.
This is the real science, but we just coming to a different conclusion based on the data.
And the bottom line is if they are going to say no, if you try to support the DNA, you're going to be attacked. And if you try to cite the DNA, people are going to say no, this is not Middle Eastern. This Y-DNA-R. This is not Jewish. But so what I wanted to do is have some of the peer-reviewed literature that, just if you want to take a screenshot for those at home or whatever,
or
and use it later.
For a second. Yeah.
Right. And so in that first one, the Y chromosome DNA haplogroup R, it shows up in a high percentages in all the Jewish populations. And so it shows that it's a valid, plausible DNA type that would have come over with Lehi's people. And then the one after that, if you could also show that one, the Y-DNA haplogroup R seems ancient in Native Americans. And what this does is, this is where, because the assumption was when they saw this, they're seeing a lot of Native Americans have this Y-DNA type. It was sort of like this, it's exact same path and history like with haplogroup X.
Yeah. Which makes sense because there were men and women that both came over with Lehi and his family, and so that wouldn't be dramatically different. Sometimes it can be different because men tend to go on conquests, and sometimes when they make conquests, they actually will end up.
You'll have the men traveling more and the women more staying in one spot, kind of thing. You'll see that some, but anyway, this is the scientists. The reaction is very same. So just like with haplogroup X, the initial response has been with this must be new, must be since Columbus, right? And so that's been the initial reaction, and that's been the sort of the mainstream assumption. But they're sort of at the point where they're starting to get beyond that, because just like with X, where they started to say, well, maybe this isn't new, maybe it really is ancient. With a Y-DNA-R, when they were looking at this, some of the scientists, and there's some of the peer-reviewed literature talking about this, it's like, we don't see how it could be that high a percentage if it really was just mixture from, since Columbus. And we don't see how there can already be this many mutations, because there are some of those that have multiple mutations, just to be clear. So they're finding Native Americans who claim a pure native ancestry, who have this Y-DNA-R, but will have a variant of Y-DNA-R that's multiple mutations away from anything they're finding over in the Old World or in Europe. And they're like, if this is just from Columbus, how is it that we're finding so much of it, so much diversity of it, so many mutations of it? Maybe it's not new, maybe it is ancient. And then when you look at it with the haplogroup X and where it occurs in the Americas, it is extremely clear that they came at the same time. So haplogroup X on the top, they say, oh no, that's too old, that's before the Book of Mormon. The one on the bottom say, oh no, that's too new, that's after the Book of Mormon. But when you look at the two together, it's like, that's the same group. That's the same group.
So I have a question. So we all just got back from Washington, D.C. And we were there specifically for the Phoenician ship. So my question here, looking at this, is it possible to tie this DNA back to the Phoenicians during that same time frame? Because it's contemporary to that.
And I mean, you can go down a rabbit hole with this, but yes, I agree with the work that Rod has done with those with the Mulekites and that Phoenicia thing, that aspect of maybe the Mulekites really were Phoenicians, maybe the Phoenicians had some contact in the Americas, and the answer is yes. Both the Y-DNA-R
I'm noticing
and the haplogroup X could have been found among the Phoenicians as well.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, and could have been the reason why you have this. We haven't mentioned this, but the Tunisian connection is just fascinating. But most people don't understand. In fact, I just did presentations in Logan and Afton, Wyoming. Logan, Utah, Afton, Wyoming, and most of the people I asked, can anybody, if I put up a map, could you point out Tunisia? And it was like crickets. It was like nobody knew where Tunisia is. So maybe just to really quickly, so the Tunisians were essentially, they have a history that says that there were people, the Phoenicians, who were, and the Phoenicia was literally Israel today, the Levant area of Israel, and Lebanon, that whole general area there. And they were the greatest seafaring people of the world at the time.
Yeah.
And there's a good possibility or probability that when the Babylonians came and sacked Jerusalem, the southern part of Israel, at 586 BC, that there may have been people who actually left there prior to that attack.
Yeah.
Now, how would they have known about that? Well, there was this guy by the name of Lehi who was predicting and prophesied that there was going to be, that the Babylonians were going to come up and do that. But it appears that there were at least some Levite priests that left that Levant area. Probably the only shipping that was going on at that point in time would have been the Phoenicians. They had the biggest armadas and the most ships and so forth. So they would have put possibly this is how the story goes. There was a princess of Israel that defected from Israel and went over to this island called Jerba, which is just off of the east coast of Tunisia. And so they went across over the top of Egypt, and it goes over, and Tunisia is generally just directly south of the boot of Italy. So if you want to find it, that's the fastest way to find it. But then she came over there, and then there's this name that shows up in the Tunisian population there in Jerba. By the way, Tunisia is about 95% Muslim, okay, and only about 5% are Jews.
Yeah.
And those Jews are concentrated on this island.
Yeah, but you're like you said, that little island has that little Jewish group that's kind of stayed cohesive.
Yeah.
And they claim that they're from that time frame.
Yeah, and they have the oldest synagogue, as I understand, in the world is there in that area. And there's also, they had a shipping port there. And interestingly enough, a lot of people have wondered, well, what about this Mulek? Because the Book of Mormon says they came from he was a son of Zedekiah, but yet we know from history that Zedekiah's sons were all taken back to Babylon and then killed in front of Zedekiah, and then after they killed their sons, then they put his eyes out. So the last thing he would ever see in this life was his sons dying. They were trying to literally end his patriarchal reign, if you will. And yet there's this Mulek that's never mentioned in the history. But interestingly enough, on the island of Jerba, there is a name that's fairly common, and it means little king, and the name is Mulek.
And that's really cool.
Or Melech, I think is how
they're predominantly found in the island of Jerba, which also one of the fascinating things about that is there's a pilgrimage every year of a Jewish population that goes to the island of Jerba, because there's still a synagogue that is active and running for over 2,000 years that's there. And
also that synagogue just happens to have in it one of the doors from the Temple of Solomon that was brought there.
Yeah, so I have one little
piece, they understand it.
I have one little piece to contribute to that too. Yeah. So John Lefgren with the Heartland Research Group, who did such a good job putting that together, he asked me to see if there was any DNA evidence related to the Jews that were in Jerba, and there is one study, and what it showed was they were all mitochondrial DNA haplogroup J, which is a well-known Jewish. So it did fit that they were a Jewish ancestry. But interestingly, in that story of some of the priests of the temple that took that trip, 13 of the 34 men they tested had the Cohen modal haplotype, which some think relates to descendants of Aaron. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
That is really cool.
Yeah, and in the beginning, I think it was in the first podcast that we did together, they actually talked about the Tunisian Jews. Well, there's only one population of Tunisian Jews, and they actually do also have the haplogroup X DNA type. So maybe it's been even more refined, and it's getting more some of the J. But they were already talking about that clear back in 2003 and 2004 that the Tunisian Jews, the Moroccan Jews.
I only looked up. I saw one study. I didn't see any haplogroup X in that one, but it's okay because we know X wasn't the only Jewish DNA type, but it was one of them.
Yeah. Well, in fact, X is just among 12 of the predominant DNA types among Jewish populations around the world.
For me, this is a lot is happening here. It's exciting because well, earlier you mentioned how, why is it so important for the different faiths in the Middle East to have that tie back to the Dome of the Rock, right? And it's because they all want that blessing. Yeah. Well, and that's in the Old Jerusalem, in the ancient world. And something that occurred to me recently is you have so many of the Native Americans here in North America. And they're all located in a specific area, this huge nation that we know exists, and it's right along the Mississippi River. Now, why can't we find more information about how all of these Native Americans are tied to each other? And why is that information kind of in the down low? And why does the Smithsonian have all that information is not really releasing it out to everyone else? And so to me, it's like there's so many blessings there that I think that if we start to uncover them and begin these excavation research, we're gonna find that these are, in my opinion, these are the people of Israel.
Yeah, I think we're at the early stages. We're at the early stages, and I think I'm looking forward to seeing what information we get out of the research as we start to realize where to look. And what to look for that'll open the door to get more information.
And one of the things that Arij Ben Sassi was mentioning, which is the young lady from Tunisia, Tunisia, that the Romans took over Carthage. Like there's the War of Elephants, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with the War of Elephants that are watching, but that was the fight that happened that the Romans came and just completely annihilated that nation. And so and then who gets to write the history? Right,
the victor.
It's the victor, right? and now here we are in America, and back then that part of the United States wasn't the United States. It was the frontier, right? So the United States was the colonies, right? And so here we are as the victors of the new world, right? And what happened to all of these Native Americans? Where is that history? And so I kind of see a parallel there, a parallel of Romans taking over and kind of wiping the history, and then you have, unfortunately, some part of the history where it's like these Native Americans have lost their history.
Yeah, the history's lost, and what can we do to help get it back? Right?
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why the Tunisians were so excited about this, because they had their history kind of stolen from them. They don't have a written history because Alexandria and Carthage, the libraries there were burned to the ground by the Romans. So the only written history that's left that actually verifies some of their greatness of their civilization, basically these Phoenicians, is actually the Book of Mormon. And so they're excited about having their history rewritten back into history, and we're excited about having the history of the Book of Mormon written into Native American history here in North America. So but the last thing, and this is probably my, all this DNA stuff is all wonderful.
Yeah.
But to me, the strongest evidence of where the Lamanites are located is actually from Joseph Smith. No. It actually goes even above his head.
Yeah.
So how many of you that in our audience here, how many of you believe that the Lord knows who the Lamanites are and where they're located? That these are the remnant Lamanites? Because if you believe that the Lord knows, then you have to take special attention to the Doctrine and Covenants, where the Lord commands Joseph Smith to send missionaries to the Lamanites in sections 28 and 30 and 32. Now, he called them Lamanites in all three of those. I don't think the Lord's got his words wrong, okay? So he didn't say to go to the Native Americans. He said to go to the Lamanites. And then Joseph Smith immediately dispatched 4 missionaries. There's Oliver Cowdery and Parley P. Pratt and Peter Whitmer Jr., and another guy by the name of Ziba Peterson, who's not as well known, but he's there in section 32 in the Doctrine and Covenants. And Joseph Smith sends them off with the very first copies of the Book of Mormon that just barely came off the Grandin press, right?
Right.
The very first missionaries ever called in this dispensation, and the first place that the Lord wanted them to go was to the Lamanites.
Yeah.
And then in section 32, he says, and I myself will go with them. I am their advocate with the Father, and nothing shall prevail against them. So that, to me, brothers and sisters, it sounds like to me, that's the Lord taking them on a personal tour, as the personal guide to these 4 first missionaries, to people that the Lord called Lamanites. And Oliver Cowdery, Parley P. Pratt actually wrote in his diary, and later on it was in his autobiography, and he listed the tribes that they went to go see. And those tribes were in New York, in Ohio, in Missouri. And he listed those tribes out. And those tribes that they went to go see are all part of this Algonquin-speaking language groups of Native American Indians. And my question to you is how did Joseph Smith know that?
Yeah.
Did he have a team of geneticists to consult with before he sent the first missionaries to tell them that the Book of Mormon was the history of their ancestors? Well, they went to these Native American tribes in North America, and their ancestors are not Mayan. Their ancestors are not Incan. Their ancestors are not Aztecs. Their ancestors are the Hopewell Mound Builder people, and they've been able to connect that up because the Hopewell people have the haplogroup X anciently that the people have today. So we know that they were the direct descendants from these Hopewell people, who we are saying are the Nephites. And it all makes sense, and it all comes perfectly clear, and it makes God out to be a faithful God.
Yeah.
That he actually sent missionaries to these people he calls Lamanites, and then the DNA actually today verifies.
Yeah, that. And that's powerful. I would say I do think that there's a little bit of blood of Lehi throughout all of the Americas. That's my personal opinion and belief. But
and that actually I have a DVD called the Hinterland Hypothesis that I actually go into detail on that, because after the Book of Mormon time frames, about 900 AD, the Mayan civilization had what they call the Great Collapse. You can look it up online or whatever. They left the areas down there in Central America, and for a long time people have wondered, where did they go? Did they just disappear? Did they go down to South America? Did they come north? And the answer to that has been pretty well definitively answered by archaeology today. They came north. They came up into what is now the Mississippi River Valley. Now remember that the Nephites were wiped out about 400 AD, but about 900 AD, all of a sudden this new culture, this new civilization arises in the Mississippi River Valley called the Mississippian culture. Yeah. And suddenly they build the great big huge, the biggest of the earthworks and so forth are there. Wayne May actually was talking to a Native American chieftain. He said, well, who built Cahokia, which is just outside of St. Louis? It's the largest mound in the Americas. It's 17 acres at its base and rises over 100 feet. Over 15 million basket loads of dirt were hauled in to make that mound. And Wayne asked the Native American chieftain, he said, so who built Cahokia? And he said, well, we built it, but we built it as slaves. And we said, wait a minute, you built it as slaves. Slaves to who? He said, slaves to the Snake people who came up from the south. And they enslaved us. We were living in individual family units we called tribes. They came up as a cohesive army. They enslaved us, and for 300 years, they made us carry these basket loads of dirt day after day, month after month, and year after year for 300 years. For generations, they hauled this dirt for the Mayan taskmasters as slaves. He said, but after 300 years, we were able to drive them back out of our lands. But for 300 years, we intermarried with them. And so when they left, they brought a lot of our bloodlines back down into Central and South America, which is why the current populations of southern Mexico and Guatemala and Belize and so forth, they do in fact have the North Native American DNA types, which includes the haplogroup X. So today, the haplogroup X is, like you say, it's ubiquitous throughout North, Central, and South America. Not so much up in the Aleuts up in Alaska, but Central and South America. And so it actually makes perfect sense that was what happened. So we have the Book of Mormon happening here in North America. The Mayan civilization collapses. They come up, they intermarry, they go back. And this is the reason why we have temples in Guatemala and southern Mexico where the dedicatory prayers talk about the temple is to serve some of the children of Lehi who live, in the general area there. Yeah. So they are in fact descendants of Lehi. So there are people in Central and South America who do have that have the covenant blood, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
In them, but that doesn't mean the Book of Mormon happened there.
That's right.
And that's our explanation.
All right.
David, do you have any other comments? Anything we didn't cover yet that we need to?
I think we did a good job. I think we did covered the material that I wanted to get through. Yeah. So
this is a very intensive subject. There's a lot of ins and outs and back and forths. I have a lot of quotes directly from journals that are just like eyes glaze over, because there's a very specific to genetics research, and so when you're not used to those terminologies, it just creates confusion. So we've tried to describe it as best that we can. Is there anything that we're leaving out that we should be addressing, Brill? This MesoAmerica Heartlander?
The Mesoamerican Heartlander here. No, I think you guys did great. I would just simply say, for all of the people that are listening, you need to go and watch the Hinterland Hypothesis and some of the other the 5 DVD set, and that's where the bulk of this stuff is, and that's where I got it from. And this just barely kind of scratches the surface. It kind of whets the appetite, if you will. And then you can go deeper. Go read David Reed's book on Face of a Nephite, like that. This is such cool stuff.
Yeah, that's at your website has it, the Book of Mormon Evidence.
So we have on our bookstore. We have Rediscovering the Book of Mormon Remnant Through DNA. You can get that at the bookstore. You can also download it for free off of the website on the downloads page.
And we're going to be uploading the 5 DVD set onto our streaming website. And so if you want to check that out, go ahead and subscribe to our streaming website, and you'll be able to find that there.
There are a couple of other really interesting books. Do you want to just mention this one? Do you have a...
I read that once a long time ago, so I don't know that I know enough about to say. It had some really interesting stuff in terms, I thought, of it was looking at some of the appearance, the facial appearances. That was sort of a thing that author got into, but I've never met the author.
Alexander Paulos. Yeah. But he did this book a couple of years ago, and it just shows some of the earliest pictures of Native Americans, and then early pictures of Hebrews and Jews. Yeah. And just the facial patterns look very, the elongated kind of face and that kind of thing. Is really fascinating stuff about the skull shapes and that kind of thing, and some morphologies there. Again, want you to don't forget to hit the button and subscribe. We have probably, I think, Brill, what is it, about 60% of people who are watching our videos are not subscribed, so they're missing when new things come out. So. Don't be one of those.
and make sure, so hit the button on the right-hand side. There's a subscribe button there, and there's also a little bell. Yeah. If you click the little bell there, it'll notify you when we release this video. And on top of this,
new videos.
We're going to be releasing several videos with our friends at Word Radio, kind of covering some of these things. If you have any people that are my age, I'm 33. If you know any people, your kids, your grandkids, that need to have this information, we kind of spiced up this information a little bit more on their show. But again, if you subscribe to our website for the streaming, you'll be able to get that information and get it over to them.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Listen, so thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you're enjoying these podcasts. I hope you like the deep dives. I know that for a lot of people, I've had people tell me all the time. In fact, when I did my first DVD, which was 4 hours long, I said, "Oh man, nobody is going to watch that. Nobody's going to sit there for 4 hours and watch this stuff." And yet, many of you did. Yeah. And for that, I am eternally grateful because we have to give people enough in-depth information that they can become armed and dangerous when it comes down to defending the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yeah. And without having the full scope of the research, it's easy to be, when somebody goes, "Oh, well, what about snow in the Book of Mormon?" And if it throws you off the tracks, say, "Oh gosh, then that's not good. So we want people to be able to have cohesive, cogent, and solid answers for the faith that is in us. As brothers and sisters, the Book of Mormon is true. It is a testament of the ancient peoples of the United States area in America.
A real people and a real history.
Yeah.
I want people to know it's a real history.
Yeah. Thank you.
Not intended, and that's not its primary purpose, as President Nelson said. But nevertheless, it's a real people, and it is an account of what they did. So.
Yeah. So I often like to point this out, and that is that when we, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, are primarily, if you ask somebody what the purpose of the Book of Mormon is for, they will say it is to testify of Jesus Christ. But did you know that that's not exactly what Jesus Christ told Joseph Smith was the reason why the plates were preserved? He says in section 3 in the Doctrine and Covenants that the reason why the plates were preserved was so that the prophecies and the promises that were given to the ancient peoples of the Americas would be made known to them, that they could come back and be part of his gospel. It is to restore them back to their true culture and their true heritage, and we really can't do that unless they know that deep down inside, right down to their very DNA, they're the people.
So this was written for me.
That's right. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, enjoy your journey.